Hi everyone, welcome to Game Strategy and How to Achieve It. If you don't know me, which I'm sure at least some of you do, I've been around a long time. My name is Jackson. I've been a member of Team 4250, the Lightsabers, for the last 5 years. This year we're not competing, but I've done a lot of different stuff within FTC and FRC. I've been a volunteer at FLL events. Last year we won the state championships, and we went to the world championships in Houston, where we were an alliance captain and lost in divisional semifinals to who would be the eventual world champions of AI Citizens. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about how you should design your game strategy and how throughout the season you're actually going to reach that game strategy that you've created, and then how that kind of evolves over time. So one of the big things to remember is that your game strategy should be the thing that drives how you design and build your robot, right? If you need your robot to pick up elements, off a platform that's over the field, then your robot has to be able to do that, because that's how your strategy is designed to pick things up. And while both your solo strategy and the strategy that you're going to use with your alliance partner are important, it's easier to start with solo strategy and just kind of ignore the fact that there's going to be 3 other robots on the field, because if you try and think about all 4 of those robots playing together at the start, it gets really confusing, and then if something goes wrong and you don't have an alliance partner, which will happen, you're not prepared to actually play on your own. So I'm going to be talking a lot about how you do your own personal strategy, and then a little bit about how you adapt that when you actually go to competition and play with another team. So I'm going to start by talking about how you design your strategy. So the easiest thing to start with there is the teleop period. Teleop period, while it may not seem like the simplest, it is the longest part of the game, is the least strategically complicated, right? Because there's usually going to be about 1 task that you have to do, and you're going to do that for 1.5 minutes, and that's all you're going to be working on. So we call that cycle time, right? So you're cycling this one task and scoring elements. So, but there's sometimes some nuance into how you do that. There can be multiple ways to score with your game elements. So there was a game, for instance, a couple years back, where you had 2 different types of game elements that you picked up out of one place, but then there were 2 different areas which you could score them at, and so you had to think about which area made more sense. One area was less points, but a little bit easier to score on. However, both alliances could score there. And the other place, while only your alliance could score there, was a little bit harder to score on for only a few more points. So what we did is we did human testing. So that's where you take your game field and you, as a person, get down on your hands and knees with a pair of tongs or a spatula, some sort of hard to use item, and you crawl around on the floor and you put game elements on things. I know it sounds really silly, but it's actually one of the easiest ways to figure out how hard it is to score. So that lets you get an idea of what your cycle time is going to be, right? And then you can see, how many points you get for doing the task over here, whereas how many points you're going to get for doing the harder task over here. But one of the most important things, if you want to be a high-level robot, is regardless of what your main strategy is in teleop, you need to be able to score everywhere. Because, again, you can't count on what your alliance partner is going to do. Your alliance partner could be really good at scoring in one spot, whereas you're able to score in both spots. Maybe one's a little weaker than the other, but because your alliance partner is only able to score well in that one spot, you need to be able to score in the other spot, because otherwise you're going to be in each other's way, and it's not going to be a great alliance strategy. So being able to score everywhere is a really important facet of a high-level robot. Another way that teleop can be a little nuanced is multiple pathways to get to scoring. So that's been a case in very few of the games that I've played in, but there have been some instances where these pathways have either been shorter or required some sort of way to get over them. There's been a terrain game where you had to actually roll over PVC pipes laying on the ground. And so things to consider are, do these pathways make you faster? Do you get a faster cycle time by figuring out how to go over this terrain or under these obstacles? And in some cases, do the harder pathways score you points? Is that a method to receive points in the game? And the biggest thing that teleop requires is consistency and speed. Every time you pick up an element, you want to be able to score it. You don't want to have any problems trying to get it in the scoring location and get points, because then you've wasted some of your time. And then speed, obviously, the fastest cycle time is what is going to get you the most points. But there are robots that have a really fast cycle time, but aren't consistent in actually scoring that cycle. And so while both are important, in my experience, consistency is that thing you really want to look for in your game. So now I want to talk about the in-game period, which is a continuation of teleop, but has some different tasks that you're going to do. So if you haven't played, if you're a rookie team, you haven't done any FTC before, there is a 30-second autonomous period, a 2-minute teleop period. The first 1 minute and 30 seconds of that period, you can't do any in-game tasks. And then the last 30 seconds is this period called in-game. So in in-game, the teleop scoring doesn't stop. You want your in-game specific tasks to take as little time as possible. You should be trying to do those tasks in the last like 10 seconds. And you just want to keep cycling, right? So if you have a cycle time of 7 seconds, let's say, you want to get 3 more cycles in that last 30 seconds before you start doing your in-game tasks, because that's what gets you the most points. And a lot of the time, those in-game tasks are actually really easy to do, like one after another at the very end of the match as the buzzer's going off. And it's hard to go back from doing those in-game tasks to actually scoring teleop. So don't stop scoring teleop for your in-game tasks. The other thing to consider when we're talking about in-game is not every in-game task is actually worth it. So what would make an in-game task worth it? Well, one thing is if it uses a system that you're already using to play the game. So an example of this would be a couple years ago, we were building towers out of really big Lego bricks. And at the end of the match, you had to place this team-specific item on top of your giant tower. And so that just used the same system that we were already using to build the tower to place it up there. And so that was a really worthwhile in-game task because it was effectively just free points. You just put it up there at the end of the match and you got a whole bunch of points off of it. The other way that it is worth it is if it consistently scores more points, and note the word consistent, in the time it takes to complete, then you could do any more teleop cycles, right? So an example of this would be last year when you had to shoot a paper airplane across the field. So for rookie teams, this was worth about 30 points, which was almost was 5 times the number of points that you could get in a single teleop cycle. So if you took the time it would take to get another teleop cycle to land that paper airplane in the same spot every time, you would get 5 times the number of points. And so while it was a really hard in-game task to do, you had to come up with a separate system, you had to think about paper airplane mechanics, you had to make all these paper airplanes. It was something everybody did, and it decided matches at Worlds. Personally, in our divisional semifinal match that we lost because our alliance partner didn't get their paper airplane off. They tried to cycle one more time, and so they didn't get the paper airplane. and we lost by 8 points. So it's important to focus in, because what they didn't say in that video out there, but what is true, is while your autonomous tiebreaker is your average autonomous points, is your first tiebreaker, your second tiebreaker is in-game points. So having a high number of in-game points is also really important to your ranking within your league and then state. And the last thing about in-game is you always want to do the highest end of match task possible. So usually there's going to be at least one place you can park in-game. Excuse me. At least one place you can park in-game. And then maybe, somewhere else that you can hang with your robot, or a harder spot that you can park. And that's something that you do at the end of the match, right? So you can actually, don't tell Ingrid I said this, but you can continue driving after that buzzer sounds for like half a second to the second, because that buzzer is 3 seconds long, and your robot doesn't have to stop moving until the end of that buzzer sound. So you have to be, moving to put your controller down. But if you're full throttling to get to your parking spot at the end of a match, and you're there before the buzzer sounds, that's points. So you want to figure out where the highest point place for you to be at the end of the match is, and always be in that spot. Because that, again, contributes to your tiebreaker, and it's just really easy, consistent points for you to get. So now is my personal favorite. I'm a programmer, if you don't know. That's my main thing. I also drive, strategize, and build. I do everything, but I started programming. I love programming. And this is autonomous period. So the first 30 seconds of the game is totally hands off the controller. You lean down, you press a button, and then your robot is going to do whatever you told it to do for 30 seconds. But it's a lot more, it seems really scary because you don't have any control. You're not driving the robot. But it's actually a really simple part of the game, in my opinion, because there's one action that you always need to complete. That's the bonuses. So there's these things called autonomous bonuses. There's always going to be one, maybe two. Last year we had two. It was a weird game. We had 2 autonomous bonuses, so it was very high scoring. But as a rookie team or a veteran team who's starting their season, you want to choose whichever one is the easiest bonus to get, and you want to make that consistent. Figure out, how to always get it every match. Usually it's going to involve some sort of randomized element. And if you can get that every match, it's usually 20 points. And so getting both you and your alliance partner getting that bonus, 40 points to start the match off, right? So against teams that don't get that, that's a huge advantage. You'll see scoreboards as you go throughout the season where after autonomous, it's like 65 to 20. That's a hard gap to make up. So if you're getting that bonus every time, you're putting yourself in a great spot. And with that, don't worry about placing extra game elements, right? So you can usually do the same things that you do in teleop in autonomous. You can pre-program your robot to do them. And it'll get you a few more points. It'll usually be a 1 or 2 more points per game element that you score compared to teleop. But it's hard to place them. It's hard to score your game elements in autonomous because it's pre-programmed, and it's harder to work around your alliance partner. So don't focus on those extra game elements. That's like a pre-league tournament kind of thing, right? If you already have a 100% consistent auto, then you think about, okay, now here's how I improve it to go from having a 30-point auto to having a 55-point auto because I placed 2 more game elements. And the last thing is, you're always going to be able to park an auto, no matter what. There's never been a game where you can't just have the robot move to a position, and score points. So for any team, if you don't have a consistent auto yet, have an autonomous that parks out of the way, right? It gets those 5 points or 10 points for navigating to the right spot on the field, and have it be out of the way. So if you're an alliance partner, excuse me, can have has a really consistent auto that gets 40 points. Then you're out of their way so that they can do their max auto, because it's a cooperative game. Your points join together. So sometimes the best thing to do is get 45 consistent points rather than getting 55, 80% of the time points, right? So having that auto that parks out of the way, really beneficial. So now I want to move on. I've talked a lot about like the different things you need to figure out in your strategy. So now I want to talk about how you actually take that strategy and get it working with your robot in the shop. And I'm going to continue talking about the autonomous because while the actual gameplay of autonomous I think is fairly simple, how to actually achieve it isn't. I can speak from experience when I say that I've spent probably at least 100 hours in the shop over 5 years just running autonomous programs, 30 seconds a piece, just hitting the button, watching it run, and seeing what it does. That's a lot of time. But that's what it takes to have a consistent auto. So, like it says in the first point here, if you want to have a good, consistent auto that you know is going to work, you have to test it more than you think you do, right? If you think it's worked 5 times in a row, then you got to see it work 10 times in a row. If you think it's worked 20 times in a row, then you need to see it work 25. And that sounds like a lot. But like I said, that's 100 hours over 5 years. So I'm spending like 20 hours a season, which, when you look at it, really isn't that much time, right? It takes effort, especially outside of like what would be your normal coding time. And so that's the big thing that I see a lot of, especially rookie teams. The mistake they make is the programming team doesn't get the robot from the build team early enough before competition. So in my experience, the best way to do it is to have your build team done with the robot 2 weeks before competition. That gives you enough time to program your autonomous, to test it a couple of times, and make sure that it's working properly. And then you can fix things that, maybe a system isn't working in your autonomous, and so you have to go back in and revise your code. But to do that, to be able to do it in just 2 weeks, your programming team has to be working on autonomous without the robot. You want to have a shell of your autonomous, right? So maybe you don't know the exact distances that your robot's going to have to go, but you can take a tape measure to the field and you can measure everything out. And if you're using encoders especially, you can plug all those numbers in, and as soon as you get the robot, you can already run a working autonomous, right? It can already be driving the moment you get the robot. Like I said before, you're always going to have to read an object to get the bonus in auto, right? You either have a 1 in 3 chance, you choose a spot and you drive to it, but for a consistent auto, you have to read an object with either TensorFlow, or we've used Euphoria before, or now we're switching to this new program called OpenCV. All of the documentation for that is on First's website. You can find all of it. And so as a programmer, you can be working on that before you get the robot. You can have some sort of vision code already set up to start testing. So my advice when we're talking about autonomous consistency is it needs to run from each position perfectly. No missed points. Your maximum autonomous points that you're trying to get from each position 3 times. So last year there were 3 positions per place that we started on the field, and so I was doing 9 to 10 runs for each one of those positions we started on the field. And it worked. We never failed. The only time we failed autonomous World Championships was when the other alliance came across the center line and hit us while we were running our auto. Other than that, it worked, I believe from the league tournament until then, we only had 2 failed autos. So that was like something 2 out of 40, I think. It was consistent. But that's how we got there, is running it a lot. The other thing, don't trust practice fields at competition. If you are trying to test auto on a practice field, it's not going to work when you get on the regular field, because the practice fields aren't set up to standard that the regular fields are on. If you've ever helped set one up, you'll know that we're taking tape measures to them. We're making sure everything's in almost the exact right spot. The tape is all on the field to, you know, a 1/16 of an inch. Practice fields won't be like that. So you want to be working on your field at your home shop or home classroom, and you want that field to be perfect. You want it to be precise, down to not the 32nd of the inch, right? You don't want to be worrying about, is this tape in the right spot? Everything to set up the field is online, and even if you don't have a full field, for autonomous, you can set up tape and cardboard scoring elements on just foam mats that you can buy off Amazon, and it'll do the same thing. You'll have the same effect, and you'll still be able to get a good test in so that you can be fairly confident when you go to competition. The last thing is you have to set your robot up on the field before each match. So having a system that lets you set it up the same way each time, whether that's something that comes off your robot or, you know, it's 1.5 thumbs, which is a real thing that I've done, or, you know, a fist, whatever it has to be. You can't bring any objects to the field with you to help set it up. You can't have a tape measure or a piece of wood or anything, but you can have it attached to your robot. And if you want to make sure you're setting it up the same way every time, otherwise your auto is not going to work the same way every time. All right, so drive team strategy. This is about the same level of complicated. I was going to say it's less complicated, but that's a lie. So for your drive team, you want to practice with the robot like you're playing a sport. You know, people get mad at me all the time when I call robotics a sport, but in the way that I treat it and the way that if you want to be really good, you should be treating it is like a sport. You have to practice like that, is like you're building up your muscles, because in a way you are. You're just building them up in your mind. So that means practicing different actions separately. So that might mean driving across the field with the robot to get a feel for that. That might mean just placing items on whatever thing you have to score on. Might just mean picking them up, driving back, dropping them, and then putting it back and doing it again over and over until the muscle memory is subconscious. Then practice full matches with autonomous, right? I practice a lot of matches without autonomous, but I always make sure to practice full matches with the autonomous period, because I want to get a feel for competition play. I want to know what it's like to run the autonomous, maybe not be in the exact spot I've been running from in teleop, and then have to pick the controller up in 8 seconds and get ready to play. If you're using 2 controllers, which I personally don't, if you're wondering, I'm a big 1 controller person. Our team has always had 1 driver. But if you're using 2, practice communication, right? You're a team. You have to work together, and you need to be able to talk to each other in that high stress situation of a match, where there's noise going on, there's buzzers going off, robots are hitting each other, and you have to be able to stay calm and keep talking to each other, and maybe sometimes just know what the other person's going to do, right? So it's hard to hear it sometimes, especially as the competitions get bigger. At state and especially at Worlds, you can't hear anything that's being said around you unless the person's right in your ear. So you have to be able to know what that person's going to do before they even do it. And the last thing to remember is when you're practicing driving, not every practice match is going to go your way. But that's why it's practice, right? So just stay calm, go into the next match, figure out what you can do better, what went wrong, and improve upon that match. So now we have to adapt our strategy to the other teams, right? We've got our solo strategy. We know what we would do if there weren't 3 other robots on the field, but sadly, you're going to go play with 3 other robots on the field, and that makes everything start to break down a little bit. But don't fall away from your strategy. So competition day, your strategy should bring out the best of both robots on the field, even if that means a slight detriment to your strategy. You know, maybe you lose 1 cycle because you want your alliance partner to get 4 cycles, right? You get 6 instead of 7, they get 4. That's still more than 7 cycles, right? So it should be bringing out the best in your robots. Sometimes that means you're bringing game elements to your alliance partner on the other side of the field because they're that much better at placing them than you are. And that allows you to score more points because you're both doing separate actions and you're not in each other's way. When you're talking to your alliance partner about strategy, be honest about your consistency and best traits. There's nothing that's more disappointing as a driver than when you're trying to talk through strategy and your alliance partner tells you that they can do something like 95% of the time, and then you get into match and it's clear that the robot isn't broken or anything, but that they just can't do what they said they could. So I know it's easy to be really confident in yourself and be confident in your abilities, but don't overestimate yourself. Let your alliance partner know exactly what you can do, and then let them help you figure out how you play together. Be prepared to play on your own. Crazy things happen. Robots break. I've watched whole wheels come off of a robot during a match. So just be prepared to play on your own. Don't get flustered when that happens. And if your robot breaks, if something goes wrong and you can't do the strategy you wanted to do, again, don't get flustered. Make sure you don't get penalties. You know, don't do anything that would give your opponents points. And get your autonomous and in-game points, right? Figure out how to get those points that boost your tiebreaker and lead you to having a higher ranking regardless of what the outcome of the match is. All right, and so here's some post-competition day questions that I ask myself after I finish a day. So what about your strategy worked? What maybe didn't work so well? Was your autonomous and in-game consistent? Those are the 2 most important facets of the game in terms of like scoring tiebreaker points so your ranking increases. So were they consistent? How can you utilize your alliance partner better and maybe let them utilize you a little bit better so that you work together? What can you reasonably add to your strategy to make it more consistent or score more points? Did another team do something that you maybe liked that you want to add to your strategy or think you could change to make your strategy better? Is there a faster way to cycle game elements? Did someone go across the field in a way you hadn't thought of before that seemed much faster? And where does your game need the most improvements? So some final thoughts. Strategy is always going to evolve throughout the season. Don't be afraid of that. You know, let it kind of shift and morph. It's a constant, ever-changing thing. If someone on your team comes up with a new strategy and you as a driver are like, oh, well, that's totally different than what I've been doing, don't be upset, right? They came up with something that if you try it and practice it, might score you a lot more points. That's happened to me before. I've had other people on my team who aren't drivers be like, well, you could do this, and then suddenly we're scoring 20 more points a match. Set goals as a team, as a drive team, as programmers. Work towards achieving those goals. You know, don't set them lofty. Don't be like, yeah, it's my rookie year, I've never programmed before, and I want to score 50 points in autonomous. Right? Set a goal that's more like, okay, I want to see the element and score that bonus every time. And then I want to go park. and then I'm going to work on placing more elements, right? Set those goals to be achievable. Changing your robot drastically is going to change your strategy. Make sure you have enough time between changing your robot and going to competition that you can actually effectively relearn how to do your strategy or redesign your strategy to work with a new robot. I've watched teams rip their robots apart 2 days before competition and then put it back together, and suddenly they can't drive or nothing they programmed works because they didn't give themselves enough time to rework with that robot. The biggest mistake, there's a huge block of text here, but to sum it up, the biggest mistake I see, especially rookie teams make, is not giving their team, the rest of their team, enough time to work on the robot after it's built. So having a robot that isn't perfect, but works enough so that auto can be tuned and drivers can practice is better than having the theoretically perfect built robot. You have to be able to tune auto and practice driving more than a day before competition. You need at least a week, really 2 weeks if you want to be consistent, and find things that are broken about your robot, right? You might find that there's a screw loose, and you want to find that on Tuesday before the competition rather than competition morning during your first match. Make sure everyone on the team is involved in what's going on with the strategy. Don't just have your drive and programming team know what's going on and the build team not, because then they don't know what they need to do to improve upon the robot. They don't know what they need to think about while they're not building on how they can help get to those goals. So make sure everyone's involved with game strategy. And then finally, I'll have these slides posted on Discord after the presentation, because I don't think that computer is picking up anything that's on the screen. I knew it wasn't. I looked at it earlier. So, but I'll have these posted on Discord so that you can go back and look at them. And so now I want to open it up. If anyone has any questions about any of this, you can give them now, and I'll answer them as best as I can. All right. Well, thank you. Oh, what? Huh? Oh, yeah.
Just wanted to ask, how many hours a week do you average working on the robot, programming and or building, or for all of it?
So my team met 2 hours a week, 2 hours a day, twice a week. So we did 4 hours as a team. Personally, so I did in this last season, I did CAD for our scoring mechanism. I programmed the entire robot, and I was a driver. So I was spending personally about 14 hours a week, either in the shop or working on robotics. And obviously that's not something that's feasible for every person. I'm crazy. I wouldn't go back and tell myself to do that again. That was a lot of robotics, but it takes a lot of time to have a really good robot, and it takes a lot of effort from every person on your team. All right. Any other questions? I don't want to cut anyone off again. All right. I think that's everyone. So thank you all so much for being here. If you want to reach out to me about anything, my name is Jackson again.